The entrepreneurs you talk to, do they like the idea of Nigel Farage? Do they see a kindred spirit? Where do they go if they've fallen out of love with Labour and the Conservatives they see as being on the way out?
Sir Jim Ratcliffe has poured a whole load of money into his passions over the years.
So he's met Starmer. We know he knows Starmer. He's met Badenoch, he said. So now he's meeting the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage.
When he meets you before Christmas, the first thing he's going to do is say, "Can I have some money?" If he asks you, you'll say no.
I'm Dominic O'Connell. I'm the business columnist at The Times and business presenter on Times Radio.
And I'm Hannah Prevett, associate business editor of The Sunday Times.
This is the first episode of our new podcast, The Business. Isn't that exciting?
It is so exciting. It's brilliant to be here in the studio that was made just for us. Isn't it glorious?
Amazing. Red and black colours. Love it.
And what are we going to be doing here, Dom?
The whole idea of this podcast is to bring people inside the kind of conversations that you and I have all the time, isn't it? Big business stories, they always involve people, big money, ego, ambition, politics often, technology. And you and I have had lots of conversations with these kinds of people where you find out what's really happening behind the scenes. And this podcast, the idea is to bring everybody who's listening into those conversations so they can hear what's really going on.
Like you, I'm fascinated by the personalities behind the scenes, how they operate, what makes them tick, and where you're interested in big business, so the FTSE global industries. My focus has always been much more on kind of entrepreneurship, tech, startups, those businesses that are really shaping the world tomorrow.
And also, it's the personalities at the top of these companies, the founders, the chief executives, the investors. But of course, their individual lives, their individual decisions have a huge effect on thousands of others. You know, they're all the people who are working for them, who buy their products. So these are conversations that are vital, not just to them and to the future of companies, but to thousands, millions of people all around the world.
Absolutely. And what we're doing in this podcast is each choosing some guests and people that we find fascinating and looking behind the scenes at what they're doing. So I've lined up the founder of a tech unicorn to speak to next week. It's a really fascinating story of a British entrepreneur with a very kind of 21st century story to tell. And you, Dominic, what have you been up to?
Well, I'm not so boring as to stay here in the studio. I've been down to Monaco to find our first guest, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who is the founder and chief executive of INEOS, one of the world's biggest chemicals company. I think it's third biggest chemicals companies in the world, but he's better known, of course, as the co-owner and driving force behind the football team Manchester United.
You're so fancy flying out to Monaco in our first week, Dominic. Did you take your helicopter?
No, I didn't get the helicopter between Nice and Monaco. I had to take an Uber, which is a bit of a step down, but I managed to kind of grind it out.
I bet Sir Jim Ratcliffe hasn't taken an Uber in quite some time. But there's a really nice contrast there, isn't there, between kind of new industries like what we'll be talking about next week, and I guess perhaps those older industries.
Yeah, because Ratcliffe, I think, is kind of the entrepreneurial face of those old. He's in chemicals, which is a very old industry. It's been, one of the mainstays of European industry for more than a century, really, and Britain was in the past with ICI and other companies, an absolute powerhouse of the chemicals industry. Not so much now. And also, and we're going to talk to him about this in a bit, as part owner of Manchester United, loads of people are going to want to know what he thinks about the business of football and their current rather poor run of results.
Mm-hmm. And that means that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he's not all about oil refineries, pipelines, chemical plants, is he?
No, but those things do give me a thrill.
Maybe that's where we beg to differ.
Our business today is probably Britain's most important post-war industrialist, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and his journey and what he has to say says a lot about the British economy and also about the European economy. And to add to all that, he's a bit of a character as well, so that helps.
Yeah, he's definitely really interesting. As much as I've gleaned from him, I can see he's a prominent Brexiteer, or at least he was, as you say, a part owner of Manchester United, a great British businessman. It has to be said, whatever your views of how he's managed the club since taking over, but now a resident in Monaco.
Yeah, he lives in Monaco. When I first met him, this was in 2008, and he had never talked to the press. He was pretty much invisible. He was known as one of Britain's richest people, one of the most successful entrepreneurs, but he had no public profile at all. And after the banking crisis, demand for chemicals just fell off a cliff. The lenders to the company tried to take control of it, tried to take it off Ratcliffe. There was a huge fight, a showdown in Glazers Hall, one of the livery guild halls in the city, and Ratcliffe won, although he did have to pay about $800 million in extra fees and higher interest rates to the banks. And after that, they decided they might want to talk to someone. And so I did the first interview in a refinery and a chemicals plant in Antwerp. He was super interesting. And he gave us loads of stories about how during the crisis they'd asked Peter Mandelson for a VAT holiday. The government had said no. And he coined this, and this was when the government was giving out billions to the banks. And he coined this famous phrase, business life can't only be about banks. And after that, he got annoyed with the UK, went off to Switzerland, came back for a while, was tax resident back in the UK for a while, and then left for the sunny climes of the Riviera.
Yeah, and it's fair to say he's pretty outspoken about the government of the day, whoever that might be at the time. It's not quite a rags to riches tale, is it? But I believe that he grew up on a council estate near Manchester, went to grammar school in Yorkshire, became a chemical engineer and got into the chemicals industry that way, and then took the leap and co-founded his first company. And I believe he put his house up as part of the financing deal. He was about 40 at the time with a young family. So a huge risk, and that is a theme amongst lots of entrepreneurs I speak to, kind of taking that financial risk themselves.
It's a common story, isn't it? I'm sure you've struck it loads of times where they need a source of financing to back their big idea, and one asset that they have is their house. So that does happen a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and often the only asset they have is their house, of course. And I'm seeing this more and more actually at the moment. The banks are asking entrepreneurs to put their houses up, when they take out new financing arrangements, etc., to kind of steer their business through what's quite a difficult time.
Ratcliffe's other big insight, I mean, he took that jump and then he was on his way. And what he's done, he's built up INEOS from buying up what are pretty much unloved assets, orphan assets from the big oil and gas companies, in particular BP. BP is all about oil and gas, or was in those days all about oil and gas. And the chemicals bit was always a bit unloved. And his great insight, which I think people still don't quite understand about him, is that he worked out that these companies shouldn't really be on the stock market. They're much better funded just from debt, just from borrowing. So he issues these bonds, 7 or 8 year bonds, whatever they happen to be. The people who issue that money don't really care about what the company's doing as long as they get their money back. Whereas if you're on the stock market, one quarter's bad results can lead your share price to tumble. So he had that great insight, picked up these companies, funded them with debt, and made billions.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't do it alone either, did he?
No, so he owns 60% of INEOS. People often say at INEOS, he's 60% of the shares and 90% of the company, which I think is a bit unfair. His co-shareholders with 20% each are Andy Curry, who's kind of a bit of a genius at the operations of chemicals, and John Rees, who's the finance man.
It's like the Three Musketeers.
Exactly that.
And so to give a sense of scale, INEOS is huge, isn't it? So over 20,000 employees and more than 100 production facilities across more than 20 countries, including, of course, the Grangemouth chemicals plant. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about what that actually means, but they produce a lot of the raw materials that go into the food we eat, the clothes we wear, pharmaceuticals. So tell us more about how it works, how the kind of ingredients, I guess, that they make then go into making the things that we see all around us.
Yeah, so they take oil by and large, and also gas, and it's refined oil and gas, and they take it and turn it into all the building blocks you need for making plastics, basically, and other kinds of industrial products as well. But their main stuff is polypropylene, all these kind of fairly basic building blocks. All the plastics itself, they're right across the thing. All the kind of chemicals you need for industrial processes as well, they make all those. I remember John Rees telling me that Just Stop Oil were protesting outside their offices in London, which are just across the road from Harrods. And John is a fairly avuncular looking guy from the northeast, and he walked past one of the processors wearing the Just Stop Oil orange high-vis vest, and he sort of reached out and said, we make the polypropylene that makes this vest, and then wandered off into the offices. So, which I think is a quite interesting story, because people who talk about our reliance on oil and gas and fossil fuels don't often realize the chemicals angle of it as well. It's not just burning it in your car or an aircraft. It's in everything you use day to day. It's the entire fabric, really, of Western life.
And that goes to the point, doesn't it, that INEOS is a great kind of bellwether, if you like, for the rest of the economy. And as the budget approaches, we're at this really critical moment, I think, both here in the UK and also in Europe. INEOS itself is very much currently in the news, isn't it? So we heard earlier this week that it's sitting on about 11 billion euros worth of debt, which has resulted in a recruitment freeze, job losses, and a pause on dividend payments. Although I don't think it's going to hit him in the pocket too hard.
Total hardship for Jim Ratcliffe.
So I'm interested to know why such a big company and such an important company seems to be hitting on such difficult times.
Well, that's certainly the case in Europe. And why don't we fly down to Monaco and find out now?
So, Jim, thanks very much for having a chat to us on the Business, the podcast. You're our very first guest, you'll be pleased to know, which is a good thing. We're here in Monaco. I can see Philip Green's yacht over your shoulder. It's sunny. The sea is blue, 23 degrees. Yeah. Why did you want to live here?
That's a good question. Why would you want to come to a place that's sunny and friendly? It was, why we came here. Part of it's sort of quality of life, lots of people at my sort of age retire to a place that's warmer and more comfortable and a bit more relaxing, But I obviously haven't retired. But to be honest, the reason we came out here, which was a few years ago now, was when there was the spectre of Jeremy Corbyn wrestling Theresa May.
Because you had been outside, you had been to Switzerland, but you'd gone back to the UK, hadn't you?
Yeah, we went back to the UK for 16 to 19 for about 3 years. And then we had that, that concern about Jeremy Corbyn coming back in. And that clearly wouldn't have been a good outcome for us. So we decided we needed to find a solution to that.
Yeah. How's the business doing? Because this morning you've announced some closures of some units in Germany.
Yeah.
It's not a great time to be in the chemicals business in Europe, is it?
No. Europe's a very tough place for chemicals. The world at the moment is a difficult place because, if you think about the three main regions that we would operate in, so that would be China, Europe, and America. China, which is peculiar to our industry to an extent, is vastly overbuilt not only for China, but for the world in many cases. So that's put a lot of pressure in our marketplace. Europe is simply a mess because of high energy costs and carbon taxes, which are sort of unsustainable, and a very slow response to tariff protection in Europe. And then America is not in a bad place, but it's a bit unsettled at the moment because of Trump and his tariff negotiations. But Europe is by far and away the worst, most difficult place for chemicals, and quite a lot of INEOS is based in Europe.
Well, let's come back to Europe in a little bit. For the company, what does it mean? You're not hiring people. You'll put a hiring freeze on. You're not paying dividends.
Correct, yeah.
So you're in a cash conservation mode.
Yeah, we just have to hunker down during this sort of difficult period.
Is the state of chemicals, or perhaps the state of INEOS, like 2008 again?
Oh no,
not that bad.
Not at all. No.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No, because for two reasons. One, we don't have any covenants in our banking facilities because covenants trip you up.
Yeah.
So we don't have covenants. But secondly, we sit on a lot of cash. So the two principal legs of INEOS are INEOS Group and what we call Quattro, INEOS Quattro, because it's got 4 businesses in it. And both of them sit on 2 billion of cash each.
Right.
So there's always a cash reserve.
What's the future of the chemicals industry in Europe then?
Grim, I would say. No other word for it, really. I don't think there'll be much chemicals left in 10 years' time unless something radical happens, because ultimately, one of the primary costs in chemicals is energy, and we're not 10 or 20 or 30% disadvantaged against the United States or the Middle East, but we're 400 or 500%. It's 4 or 5 times the price. And when we're talking about energy, we're talking about gas and electricity. And we can't cope with that. And on top of that, you've got carbon tax. So what they're trying to do with the carbon tax is improve our carbon footprint. What in reality they're doing is we don't have any cash left to invest. So ultimately, all these units, and you can see just as There's a whole slew of facilities in Europe closing down. And what happens is it gets replaced by Chinese imports. But China is a coal-based economy. So you're bringing imports in to replace low-carbon products in Europe. But what good's that doing the planet if you're just replacing low-carbon with high-carbon product? And you're closing down... bear in mind with chemicals, it's one of the... Chemicals finishes up in just about every product you can imagine. Every single product you see in the hospital, or your iPhone, or your car, or your washing machine, or whatever, has got, all the consumables like shampoos and detergents and all that sort of thing. I mean, it has a huge economic importance because it's the fourth largest business in Europe, chemicals. It's about $750 billion, but it's also hugely strategic. I mean, you don't want to be completely reliant on imported materials for all of your products particularly where the world is today. Surely we've learnt our lesson from, Russia and gas. I mean, the reason gas is where it is today is because, we fell out with Russia and they cut off the gas supply. Chemicals is strategic as well as economic.
So the picture you're painting is quite a bleak one, actually, isn't it? Because if you think about Germany, all that industrial heartland is, a lot of it is the chemicals industry.
Yep.
France is pretty big. I mean, the UK still has some chemical stuff left. I mean, not a bit.
Not a great deal.
Not a great deal.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of employment which could go in the next 10 years.
1 million jobs. 1 million direct jobs, and probably you multiply that by 10 if you look at all the indirects that are related in terms of services and what have you. So it's probably 10 million jobs in Europe and $750 billion in value. I mean, the automotive industry, to put it in perspective, is 1.2 trillion. Chemicals is 700 billion, $750 billion.
Yeah. So,
I mean, they're huge. So, those are the two of the four biggest industries in Europe, automotive and chemicals, and they're both in a horrible place, but largely because of government and the decisions government's making.
What about the UK? Because we're a UK podcast, UK paper. What's the future? So the Grangemouth refinery, which you own with the Chinese company, so INEOS, that's now shut.
Yeah, correct.
What's the future for that chemicals plant, which takes some of the gas from the North Sea?
Yeah, if you sort of step back a minute, there are three large chemical facilities in the UK, which have got what we would call a cracker at the heart of them. So they're big petrochemical facilities. So you've got one in Wilton, which is in the northeast. You've got one in Grangemouth, which is on the river. And then you've got one in a place called Moss Moran, which is just north of Grangemouth. And two of those three are going to close. So Wilton's already closed. Moss Moran I'm sure, is going to close in the next couple of years, which just leaves Grangemouth. And Grangemouth is a good unit, and it's the umbilical cord to the North Sea, because the majority of the North Sea is interconnected and passes all of its oil through the Forties pipeline system, which arrives in Grangemouth. And then they separate, because when it arrives in this pipe, it's a big pipe, about 1 meter in diameter. It's like Coca-Cola. So it's a mixture of oil and gas. So they boil it all off, and the gases move across the chemical facility, and the chemical facility turns those gases into chemical products in a cracker. And then the oil gets shipped off or consumed in other refineries in the UK. But the oil you can move around, the gas is much more difficult to move around. So you're dependent on that chemical facility. But it's in quite a tough place, Grangemouth, because...
Does it make any money?
No, it hasn't made any money for 2 or 3 years. It ought to make money, but the burden in Grangemouth for energy and carbon tax of £130 million per year. So over 10 years, that's 1.3 billion. So that's all the money you require to invest in the future and make it greener, more energy efficient, lower carbon footprint, all those types of things. But all that cash gets sucked out of the business and goes into government coffers, unfortunately.
Why don't you just close it then?
Well, if you close Grangemouth, you close down 60% of the North Sea. So we, INEOS, have invested £500 million of cash into Grangemouth in the last 3 years. So it's stressed, Grangemouth, yeah.
You're not going to be investing any more in the North Sea, obviously, because at one stage when you set up INEOS Energy, that was part of the plan, was it? To buy some of these North Sea oil fields that were being sold by the likes of BP and Shell.
Yep.
That's gone.
There's a pretty significant exodus out of the North Sea because of the government policy on, shutting down, really effectively shutting down the North Sea. The taxes now are 80% and they're not giving any new licenses out. So that's a policy of closure of the North Sea, really, which is a great shame because it's a fabulous asset for the UK. There's still lots of oil and gas left in the North Sea, but everyone's running away. If it were me, I would liberate the North Sea. I would do what America does and just simply apply corporation tax to people who are operating in the North Sea. It's very simple. Everybody understands it. That's what they do in America. So in America, if you produce oil and gas and you're profitable, you pay 35% corporation tax on it. It's nice and simple. You don't pay 80%, otherwise nobody would invest in the Gulf of Mexico.
Have Reform or the Conservatives asked you about energy policy at all?
I'm meeting with Nigel Farage before Christmas. He's asked for a meeting, and I've met with Kemi Badenoch. She's talked about it. So, do you think we have had a hearing? Yeah.
Do you think your chat led to her saying, "I'm going to open up the North Sea"?
I don't know who she's spoken to.
She's spoken to you.
Yeah, she's spoken to me, but she may have spoken to other people as well. But you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out, really. In my view, energy is clearly highly correlated with economic growth. You can see that over the centuries. The UK started growing when we discovered coal. It was, China discovers coal, and America discovers oil and gas. You can see the kick up in the economies every time you've got competitive energy.
What do you make of Farage?
I haven't met him yet.
Do you think he's the answer to the UK's woes?
Well, if I look dispassionately at the UK, then I see the UK as high tax, high immigration, high crime, unfortunately now. If I look at why Trump won so convincingly in America, he won on tax and immigration, really, or the economy and immigration. And unfortunately, the current government, for whatever reason, isn't delivering on tax, immigration, or crime. It's free crime in the UK. Nothing to it. Anyway.
So if Farage is able to do that, you'll support it?
I think most people would support it if he could solve taxes, the economy. There are two sides to the taxes and the economy, I think, in the UK. One, you need growth, and you have to think about what creates growth in the UK. And secondly, the solution to having an imbalance, which we have at the moment, where we're spending more money than the government's spending more money than it's earning, is not to keep putting taxes up. And it's a weird statistic, and you and I were talking about it earlier, but the top 1% of earners in the UK pays 30% of the income tax. And in America, the top 1% of earners pay 40% of the income tax. The top 1% of earners pays more tax than the lower 90% of earners. So you need to look after the 1%. That's where the growth is going to come from in the UK, because they're the people who invest in the UK. And we've just kicked them all out. And with high taxes and the non-dom legislation.
And you've had a direct experience of that because of what you see in Monaco?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can just see Monaco is flooded with applications from the UK, as is Dubai, as is Italy, as is Portugal, almost everywhere. They're all. The thing with, I was I was brought up in a very nice but very poor household in the north of England, so I wasn't born into money, but. I lived in a council estate in Manchester for the first 10 years of my life. But the one thing that you notice as you accumulate wealth is you become more mobile. So, people who are wealthy are mobile and they can make decisions about where they wish to stay. Now, London was an absolutely wonderful place to live, But taxes need to be reasonable and you need to feel safe.
Just go back to Nigel Farage. It occurs to me that when he meets you before Christmas, the first thing he's going to do, or maybe the second thing he's going to do, is say, "Can I have some money?"
Yeah, well, I've never...
Do you do political donations?
Sorry?
Do you do political donations?
I never have, no.
Yeah.
I've always been neutral on political parties. I've never really had a preference one way or another. I just want one that runs the country well.
Yeah, if he asks you, you'll say no.
Yes, correct.
Even if he promises to tackle all the things we're talking about, crime, tax.
Yeah, I can't see me paying for policies. Really, it's not my style.
Yeah. When we were talking at the Times CEO Summit 2 years ago, you said you'd met Keir Starmer. I think you met him at the football.
Yeah.
And he seemed like a reasonable guy, and you thought he might do a reasonable job.
Correct.
Has that hope been borne out?
Well, the first part of it has not changed at all, which I think he is a reasonable bloke. He's a nice man and he's well-meaning, but I'm just not sure he's finding it easy to manage his party. I suspect is probably... And I think, I mean, this is not a criticism of Keir, because I do like him, but you have to make some tough decisions, and I don't know whether he's maybe a bit too nice.
You can make tough decisions, though, don't, because you own 60% of INEOS. You can, if you say something's going to happen, it will happen.
Yeah.
He's not in that position.
No, he's not. No, and yeah, correct. So you can't compare those two.
So lots to unpack there, Dom. But why don't we start by thinking about the politics of it all? And of course, businesses are more naturally aligned, I think it's fair to say, with the Tories. And certainly among the businesses I speak to at the moment, they're not very happy at all with what Labour has done since it's been in power. Indeed, lots of them say to me, we don't even feel like this government likes business. And there's a sense now that Reform are trying to woo some of the business community. I know some of the journalists who work on my desk are hearing very much that that's the case in the city. And when they're speaking to CEOs, Farage and his crew are out there trying to meet with them, trying to schmooze them, very much like Rachel Reeves did with her smoked salmon breakfast.
What would it be for Reform? The Beer and Fags initiative or something like that?
Yeah, I must say, I don't think that would tempt me. So did you get that sense from him?
Well, I think you heard it there. I think he quite sort of likes the idea. He's met Starmer. We know he knows Starmer. He's met Badenoch, he said. So now he's meeting the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage. But from that, I didn't get the sense that he was hugely enamoured necessarily of Farage or any of the other leaders, really. But on the other hand, if they fall in line with what he wants, which is an end to net zero policies, ways of tackling energy costs, his perception of crime, tackling that as well, then he would probably support them, not with money, but at least he'd swing behind them. But I think that is a fairly obvious thing to say, isn't it? People who deliver results, he will back. But I think it's quite a difficult thing for the current government. We talked about it earlier. This, net zero for them is something of an article of faith. It was for the Conservatives for a long time. So is Ratcliffe pushing at a door that's about to open, or is it still pretty wedged firmly shut? I'm not sure. The people you talk to, the entrepreneurs you talk to, do they like the idea of Nigel Farage? Do they see a kindred spirit? Or actually, do they not like the idea of Nigel Farage?
I think it's fair to say amongst entrepreneurs, or at least the ones I speak to, they're not kind of enamoured to the idea of Farage-level government.
But where do they go? I think perhaps Ratcliffe was hinting at that a bit. Where do they go if they don't, they're fallen out of love with Labour and the Conservatives they see as being on the way out?
I think that they are still trying to have the dialogue with the government. I think that is what they're seeing as is the natural route for them. Lots of entrepreneurs are from immigrant backgrounds, so that naturally doesn't lend itself necessarily to being a natural bedfellow with some of Farage's philosophies. No,
absolutely. Although, to counter that, I think it is true that most businesses and business people are pretty fickle. I mean, they will follow the successful government, whether it's a Labour or successful party, whether it's Labour. They went to their conferences when they were looking likely to be the next government. They certainly swung in behind Blair 20 years ago. And then they swung to the Conservatives. And if Reform continues to lead in the polls, I have no doubt we'll see lots of cozying up to Nigel Farage.
I did think it was interesting, though, that Ratcliffe mentioned crime, because it's not something we hear a lot of kind of entrepreneurs and business leaders talk about. Although another another entrepreneur that I interviewed who recently moved to Monaco, he did cite it as one of his big drivers for leaving the UK. And I do think that it's definitely a theme amongst the uber rich that they don't feel safe here in London.
In fact, he talked about it at the Times CEO Summit when I interviewed him there, what was it, 2 years ago? He talked about personal safety as being another motivation for leaving the UK.
So I think it's also fair to say that was fairly bleak, his kind of assessment of European heavy industry and how that's looking over the next few years. I think doomed maybe is too strong a word, or is it?
Well, 1 million jobs is quite a big number, isn't it? And 10 million associated jobs. But, I mean, it's hard to see what happens that really breathes life back into these energy-intensive manufacturing industries, not just chemicals, but like paper, glass, steel to a certain extent as well is in there. And whether European governments regard them as being properly strategic and choose to spend money to support them or not. Europe might get Russian gas back. And I asked him about that as well. And he said, well, listen, yes, it is possible that we get cheap Russian gas back, the thing that helped the chemicals industry in the past. He said, but we can't invest on hope. And, are you really going to take a punt on Europe-Russia relations being better in 5 years' time? That might be you might lose a lot of money doing exactly that.
Although he did also make the point, didn't he? We could simply liberate the North Sea, he said. I'm not sure it is that simple in practice, is it?
Well, I think that there are companies, and I think INEOS would be one of them, who would be quite keen to have new exploration licenses in the North Sea. I mean, there's quite a few companies listed in London who've their original pitch was picking up those assets that the likes of BP and Shell were moving on from and doing more of the North Sea. They had lower costs, so it was going to be fine for them. But I mean, the idea that Labour anytime soon is going to turn around and open up the North Sea, that would be the end of Ed Miliband as Energy Secretary.
So what does that all mean for INEOS? Just how much trouble are they in? We laid out at the beginning of this episode that they're in about 11 billion euros worth of debt. I mean, to people like you and I, that seems quite considerable.
Yeah, although they have turnover of 60 billion. I mean, they're not super profitable at the minute. They're very big in the US, which is doing fine. They're quite big in China. He talked about there being overcapacity in China. They also have joint ventures with some of the big players in the Middle East. But they are still quite big in Europe, and that's really their Achilles heel at the minute. But also, he said they've learned from 2008. They're not likely to have their lenders calling up asking to take control of the company anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. And so where do they look now for growth? Is it to America? He talked, didn't he, about investing in the
Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
They've just bought 2 pretty big fields in the Gulf of Mexico. So America is the focus now. Oh, interesting. And then returning closer to home, tell us a little bit more about Grangemouth. What exactly is happening there, or what's your interpretation? Well, so Grangemouth, the refinery bit of it, which is a very old facility, which takes oil from the North Sea and turns it into things like diesel and petrol, that has now closed. INEOS owned that in a joint venture with a Chinese company. But what Ratcliffe was talking about there is a much larger and associated chemicals facility, which takes the gas that comes out of the North Sea oil, bubbles out of the North Sea oil, and turns it into plastics or the building blocks for plastics. But he's making the important point there that it serves an extra purpose as being the recipient of all that stuff that comes out of the North Sea. So if Grangemouth closes, and he was hinting there that, it's pretty unprofitable and they've had to put a lot of money into it, what do you do with the rest of the North Sea? INEOS owns that pipeline system. If you close Grangemouth, then maybe you shut off the North Sea as a whole, in its entirety. And he was driving home, wasn't he, the real kind of strategic and almost sovereign importance of chemicals, and in particular of Grangemouth. Yeah, exactly that. And do politicians understand, or what do they regard as being of sovereign importance? Is it a high-tech computer company? They've made some interventions there recently. Is it steel? Well, they've certainly done steel. They took on the big works in Scunthorpe. Is it chemicals? I don't see any sign of the government being ready to intervene to save a chemicals plant in the UK. And of course, so you didn't just talk about INEOS. Like many billionaires, I think it's fair to say, and some millionaires that I also know, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has poured a whole load of money into his passions over the years. And in this particular case, of course, I'm talking about sport. So historically, it's been sailing, cycling, Formula One, and most famously, of course, Manchester United. So tell us a bit about how that came to pass and how the ownership works with the Glazers and who they are. Yeah, the Glazers are, I'm sure your husband hates the Glazers. All Manchester United fans hate the Glazers, don't they? So the Glazers were a real estate investing family from the US, took over in 2005. They bought a controlling stake from the two Irish businessmen, JP McManus and John Magnier. The Glazers looked to bring in some external investors, and there was this long, drawn-out process, went on forever, and Ratcliffe was going to do it, then he wasn't, and then eventually he went for it, and now he owns 29% of the club, and in essence appears to be the real driving force and manager. Even though he's a minority shareholder, he seems to be cracking the whip at Man U and making all the big appointments.
So as you hinted at before, Dom, the club has really struggled so far this season, as I hear regularly, with lots of kind of grunting and shouting from the front room.
Is your husband a really big fan?
He is a really big fan.
What does he think about Ratcliffe?
What does he think about Ratcliffe? My husband is an eternal optimist. So he thinks that we're still, that they're still going to turn a corner and that head coach Ruben Amorim is going to come into his own. But perhaps let us watch this space.
So we're talking a bit about football. So how's it going at Manchester United?
Well, it depends how much you read the press, really, doesn't it? How well things are going. We try to ignore the press, but if I again try to look dispassionately at the progress that we made at Manchester United, I think we've made quite a decent amount of good progress. So the first thing to say about a football team is there are two halves to a football team. There's the business side and there's the sports side. And you have to tackle them separately. The biggest correlation, whether we like it or not, but it's a fact, of results in football with an external factor is profitability. The more cash you've got, the better squad you can build. And at the end of the day, it's like the better your Formula One car, the quicker you go, the better your squad, the better your football should be in principle. So what we have done in the first year is spent an awful lot of time trying to put the club on a sustainable, healthy footing, and that's required quite a lot of restructuring.
It wasn't before?
No. The costs were out of control. The costs were too high, and it's a combination of the costs and the management structure and the quality of the management and the people within it and all that. There are some fantastic people at Manchester United, but there was a level of mediocrity as well in there, which had crept in over the years, and it'd become bloated. So we have made some difficult calls, I think, in order to put the football club back on a good footing. And it isn't. If you look at our results for this last year now, highest revenues ever, and the profitability, the EBITDA, second highest ever. And we're not seeing all the benefits of the restructuring that we've done in this year's results. So revenues were good because we got a great partnership with Adidas and Snapdragon, and we reached, and that, remember, second highest EBITDA, highest revenue, without being in the Champions League. We were not in the Champions League last year. We did get to the final of the Europa Cup final, obviously, and that was quite remunerative. But those numbers will get better in the future because the results of the restructuring will come through. So Manchester United will become the most profitable football club in the world, in my view. And from that will stem, I hope, a long-term, sustainable, high level of football.
One thing I don't understand about Manchester United is that you're the minority shareholder, 29%, 27%, whatever it is. How come you're cracking the whip on almost all the management decisions? Is it part of the shareholders' agreement with the Glazers?
We have...
or are they happy just to let you get on with it?
I think broadly, yes, that's probably, that latter point sort of sums it up quite well. They get a bad rap in the press. At the end of the day, I've said it before, they are really nice people, and they're really passionate about the club, even though, if you read the paper, you would never believe that, but they are really passionate about the club. And we're local and they're the other side of the pond. It's a long way away to try and manage a football club as big and as complex as Manchester United, and we're here with feet on the ground. So it's just sort of naturally gone in that direction.
So it's not a formal arrangement?
No, well, I mean, there's probably something written in the formal agreement, but I did say when we put when we finally put those legal agreements to bed, you know, because the lawyers were all over them, of course, is I hope that's the last time we ever see them. They were just put in the bottom drawer, and I've never looked at them since, to be honest. It's more about, and it should be about relationships. If you have a joint, it's not really a joint venture, but it's a partnership, then it should be about relationships, not about a legal agreement.
So if they turn around tomorrow and say, listen, we want to sack Ruben Amorim, what happens then?
It's not going to happen. It absolutely wouldn't happen, because it's just a good working relationship. They come to the board meetings. Yeah. We sit down, we talk about things. You know, we've made errors. I mean, there's absolutely no question that we've made errors as we've gone along, and we've talked about it. But no one's perfect, you know. But I think, broadly speaking, if I look, we bought 4 good players in the summer, 2 at their peak and 2 young guys, Sesko and Lemons, 2 young guys, but I think they're good footballers. Ruben obviously been under. I mean, I like Ruben. I think he's a good man, great character, great coach. But it's not all about. I know he gets, excuse my French, shit in the press all the time. But if you look at that ecosystem that surrounds the coach, it's not just about the coach. It's about, you know, the training facilities. It's about data analysis. It's about medical science. It's about the quality of his squad. He's not been there a season yet. I mean, you look at the press. I mean, I remember it. The clamouring for Alex Ferguson to be fired in his first 2 years. You know, I mean, half the press would have fired Alex Ferguson in the first 2 years. So I think I think, I mean, the results are, you know, we're results driven at the end of the day, but we have to be patient and we have to see through the results. I think there's lots of good things at Manchester United. We have to be patient. And, you know, we have a long-term plan. It isn't a light switch. And, you know, you can't run a club like Manchester United on knee-jerk reactions to some journalist who goes off on one, you know, every week. Sorry. So Amorim gets at least the rest of the season then? Amorim, he's a good guy. Yeah, I mean,
that's not the same thing. He's a good guy. It's not the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Ruben, he needs to demonstrate that he's a great coach over 3 years.
So you give him 3 years?
Yeah, that's where I would be. Yeah, 3 years, because football's not overnight.
No, and as you say, the Alex Ferguson example is exactly that, isn't it?
And you look at Arteta at Arsenal. You know, he had a miserable time for the first couple of years. You know, it's not that quick. I mean, you look. The other thing that we haven't even begun to start with yet is the academy, which is fundamentally important in football. The academy has really slipped at Manchester United, but you need the academy to be, you know, producing talent all the time. It helps you financially, and it always, you have to have a certain number of British players in your squad.
Just going back to that financial model, is the idea that eventually Manchester United will break free of that sugar daddy owner thing, where the owners are always tipping in more money at the top? Oh yeah, no, it has to be on a sustainable footing, Manchester United. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, part of the solution, I think, would be the stadium as well. If we can navigate our way through to building this new stadium, of course, that has an enormous impact on the Manchester United revenues. Yeah. Jim, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you for being our first guest on the Business Podcast. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I didn't realise that. Yeah, I feel honoured.
So again, we hear Sir Jim talk there about how he's going to make Manchester United the most profitable club on the planet. But the reality is fans don't really care about all of that stuff, do they? They just want to win some games.
Yeah, I think there's a big disconnect, isn't there? Fans want results, and particularly Man U fans want to win everything and win it in a certain style. So all Ratcliffe's talk there, although obviously it's quite sensible for the future of the club, is doesn't really matter. What really matters is if they start winning.
And I think what does really come through there is his passion, right, for the game, passion for the club. And of course, he's not the only big business name who's had a sideline in football. And I'm not trying to say that they're, on any kind of parallel to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But other people like Simon Jordan, of course, who bought Crystal Palace and now actually broadcasts from this very building, lost all of his millions in football. And I've spoken to lots of entrepreneurs who've done the same, and they'll often tell you it's the fastest way to lose a fortune. But I think he's probably all right on that front.
Yeah, how do you make a small fortune? Start with a big fortune, then buy a football club. Actually, Delia Smith is one as well. I think she was the investor in Norwich, wasn't she?
She was, and they did well for a while.
Very well. And I think if you sort of stand back a bit, so whatever Ratcliffe says about the future of Man U and his careful financial planning, the fans won't really listen to that, will they? Because they only care about results. They're thinking about something else. And there's a certain parallel here with what he's saying about net zero and high energy costs. Is anybody in power at least really listening? Because we talked earlier about that political imperative around net zero. Ratcliffe is going directly against that, saying, listen, if you want growth, if you want manufacturing in the UK, you have to cut energy costs and, in essence, abandon net zero. So he may say that, and he, obviously he has a lot of experience of these kind of things, and he's coming from a certain position and of ownership of these assets, and he sees which way it's going to go if things continue as they are. But I just wonder, really, what is the political imperative? Is anyone going to say, okay, for the UK, we abandon our long-standing net zero targets, whether it's the 2030 targets or the 2050 targets? That would be quite a seismic upheaval in UK politics. The Conservatives have done it under Kimmy Badenoch. Reform clearly wants to do it, but for the current Labour government, that is a big bridge to cross.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But Sir Jim was definitely painting a fairly gloomy picture there. And I think it's fair to say, Dom, we want to be cheerful on this podcast too, which is why next week we're going to hear from somebody running a business that's very much of the new economy.
Well, this is it. And everyone talks about, oh gosh, the UK economy's in peril. It's all terrible. People have been saying that for 300 years or longer, probably. What are these old industries that rely on, like agriculture or shipbuilding or machine tool making or cars even? Something will always turn up, and maybe that something is our guest next week.
Well, exactly. Maybe that something is AI. So Britain might not be making anything anymore, but it will be providing the intellectual horsepower that powers the economy. And of course, we have Vishal Maria next week. So he's the founder of a company called Quantexa. And I'm looking forward to seeing him next week.
Well, he can tell us, that great thing. How do you build a British unicorn? Well, I'm Dominic O'Connell.
And I'm Hannah Prevett.
And this is The Business. Thanks very much for being with us. It's a brand new thing, very exciting thing. We really want to hear from you. Do get in touch. You can email us at thebusiness@thetimes.com. We do want to know what you think, particularly your reactions to that interview with Jim Ratcliffe. And if you're a Man U fan, what do you think of his chances of success?
And of course, if there's any other things that you'd like to cover as well. If you're listening to us right now, please remember you can also watch our faces on YouTube. We'll be adding more to the channel as the show grows.
And if you want to see more of that interview with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, it was quite a long interview actually. We just took 2 chunks of it. We'll publish the whole thing on our YouTube channel. If you're a Man U fan or a fan of chemicals plants, as you are, Hannah, I know, you'll definitely want to watch that.
And please do subscribe to this podcast either on YouTube or on your podcast app, so every new episode drops directly into your feed as soon as we publish. And we'll be back with you next week. So bye until then.
Bye.